I would say, through the work of the Black Heritage Society, which I know you're familiar with, and Brown University on a commission created by President Simmons at Brown. The general public has now become aware, there's books, pamphlets, and even documentaries, that Rhode Island, indeed, was a key player in the slave trade for what seemed like at least a century and a half, if not longer. So that, I remember years ago, in the days when Representative Castro, when George first introduced the bill, people said, well, we have nothing to do with that. Well, it seems to me, especially at the legislative level and the state level of officials, they can't say, we in Rhode Island have nothing to do with that, because we all know in Rhode Island, indeed, was a key player in the slave trade.
That's an important point, and you're absolutely right. Up until recently, the black community knew. The minority community knew about slave trade.
The general public.
For years and years, they talked about the access from the Providence River through tunnels up into the east side. We knew about that for years.
We should talk about triangle trade. You know?
Right, for people to deny there was slavery in Rhode Island or that they had a major role didn't sit well. It didn't come ring true for those of us who knew. And only in the last several years have they come about bringing this forth. John Brown House and all of these other major actors in the slave trade.
Well, you know, and I think the work of the last few years has shown it. You can find places in Newport and Bristol where slaves were held with shackles against the walls. I mean, those were historical places. We know that.
Well, I was on the tour several years ago because George Castro, he started the first Black Caucus, legislative Black Caucus, and we had a New England conference, and people came from all over New England, similar Black caucuses from Massachusetts, and they were fascinated by the history of Newport. And one place I'll never forget was Spring Street in Newport, because when they took the chains off the slaves, there was a pond. And many of them used to try to dive in the pond, the history that was given to us at the time on this tour, to drown themselves rather than to go into slavery. So I mean, I'll never forget it. But I guess the thing that bothers me the most is why people would be upset with me being upset about an unjust and an inhumane system. Because I know some of my family history. What my great aunt 5 years ago from Virginia, my great aunt, my grandmother's aunt, Aunt Bertha, she died at 106, and she told us some of the family history.
Of Virginia.
From history. So I know what plantation my mother's part of the family comes from. And it's mixed with Native American. Her grandmother, Grandma Alice Wood, was riding with her father or grandfather on a horse, Indians. And the white settlers shot him off the horse, and he got a couple of arrows off, the way she told me, and he slapped the horse. And she was a little girl, and she rode it until she couldn't ride anymore, and it pulled into the Speck plantation. And then when she became of age, they married her to one of their slaves named Benjamin Wood from Crozet, Virginia. That's why Reverend Wood and I are distant cousins somewhere along the line. But, so I know a little bit about the slave history. I remember the history of our church, the Congress Street Baptist Church. This is our 190th anniversary. Well, it used to be the African Meeting House on Meeting Street, and the neighbors didn't like our worship style, so they burnt down the original building. So when you think about the Middle Passage and how the sharks used to follow the slave ships from Africa across the Atlantic, and the sharks used to follow the boat because they could smell the death. And I imagine the dead bodies they threw overboard, so the sharks are waiting. Then you, my wife's family from Petersburg, Virginia, the Tuckers, that was some of the first slaves that came to this country, with some of my wife's people. And so when you think of the Kunta Kinte, when that book was written, and his foot getting chopped off because he was a runaway slave, and the beatings they took, and his families being separated and sold, and the husband being sold, or the kids being sold, and the women being raped. And then you move along through history, through Reconstruction, and the Jim Crow laws, and then in the turn of the century, the 1900s, how over 800 men that we know of was lynched.
Do you think, Senator, and boy,
well, I'm just saying, so Joe,
you're giving us a great history lesson.
But I'm just saying, so when I see the word plantation, this is what it conjures up for me, because I know some of the family history, I know the history here in Rhode Island, and then for people to get upset with me that I'm upset, I can't figure it out. So I'm supposed to,
well,
like it never happened.
I want to ask you about that with the response of today, because one of the things that, one of my favorite views of American life always is that Americans have a selective memory when it comes to things they would make them feel uncomfortable. As you talk to people now and as you introduce this legislation, and you listen to the talk shows, you get all kinds of crazy responses. Do you think people just don't want to be reminded of slavery, or do you think they just would rather, it's too uncomfortable, it's too difficult to think about it, or they just are not concerned about it anymore?
Well, both. I think they don't want to be blamed for it, and we're certainly not, so I certainly
Kind of like you don't want to be owning up for what our history is.
Yeah, you know, they don't want to be blamed, so they would rather forget about the negative aspects of the past. But I don't have that luxury.
How many people, what's the expression among Indians, you should walk a mile in another man's moccasins, you begin to understand. You're going to say something.
Yeah, can I just add that this particular effort is not about blaming people. I mean, we certainly realize that everyone that's alive today is not responsible for what's happened in the past. What we're saying is, you know, just take a look at the history of slavery in Rhode Island as it relates to the term plantation. You know, I've certainly gotten responses as well about folks saying that we're trying to blame people now for what happened in the past, but that is not the case. If people oppose what we're doing, we do not think they're racist. That's not what we think at all. What we would like to do is come on shows like this to try to educate people about the past, because I suspect that some of the folks that are opposing what we're trying to do may not even know the full history. So they may be speaking from a standpoint of a disadvantage, at least for their message. But with us coming out, what we're trying to do is just educate folks and let them know that this is just an effort to try to remove this term and really try to heal Rhode Island and bring Rhode Island communities together.
Now, I understand that there are some in the black community, most notably Keith Stokes, who's somewhat of a historian. He's out of Newport and all of that. And he opposes the changing of the name simply because he thinks that keeping the name the way it is tends to remind people as you go forward that, you know, of the dishonesty and evil of slavery. What do you think about what those people are saying?
That argument would have some validity if we were educating our students or people about the injustices that have taken place over the course of slavery, or Rhode Island's part in it. Mr. Stokes, with all due respect, is wrong, and I disagree with him on it. He basically is saying that if we erase plantations from the state name, that we're somehow hiding history. We're not teaching it anyway. If we're teaching it in our public schools, if we're teaching it in our colleges, then that would be a valid argument.
To look at the future, you guys are obviously a lot younger than me, younger than you, and Senator too. What are young people your age saying? How big an issue is this among young people, your generation, that you too are involved in this organization? To my knowledge, it's the first time a newer generation has been involved in this issue, Harold. I may be wrong.
Well, I would say working in the public school system, the awareness has to be increased at all levels, because certainly, you know, we're celebrating St. Patrick's Day, and later on this week we'll be celebrating St. Joseph's Day. Yeah. So every group that has come to this country wants to hold on.
I know, but I want to hear what what are young people saying? What are young black Americans, particularly, and young other minority Americans of color, perhaps, saying?
We do have a lot of support from various age groups, various different ethnic backgrounds. We are trying to reach out to even younger generation than Nick and myself, into the 16 to 24 range with using rap music and videos and YouTube and things like this. So we've gotten some positive energy from the younger generation. I think it's a benefit of them participating in the electoral process with President Barack Obama. We're taking advantage of that and trying to do some good.
And some history teachers at my school asked me to come, and I did it today. I spoke to a couple of classes, and the young people, I'd say grade 10 to 12. I forgot what history class it was. It was either history or social studies class. They were very, very receptive to the issue. But getting back to Keith Stokes, who's a good friend of mine, I also disagree with him, and I think the danger is I know we had the first black regiment in Rhode Island.